Hi guys, this is Erica from Gokce Capital. Now before I begin, be sure to click subscribe and turn on the notification bell. When you think of militarized borders, you probably imagine something a bit more imposing than a sand berm. But there is one heavily armed border that is defined by such a simple structure. This is no ordinary berm. It's the berm, and it's protected by one of the densest concentrations of landmines in the world. But more on that later. For first, if you are thinking of building a garden variety berm, pun intended, here are the top things you should know. Number 1, a berm is a rounded mound of soil built upon an otherwise level patch of land. It is characterized by this rounded shape, which is what distinguishes it from a normal raised planting bed that is typically flat and rectangular. Number 2, building a berm is an easy way to add interest to your landscape or garden, while also serving several more utilitarian purposes. So a berm makes your landscape more interesting by raising the viewer's eye level, but it can also serve as a planting bed in an area with poor soil. Taller berms may help block the wind or reduce noise. In a similar vein, they can be a privacy screen when bushes are planted on top of them, and they can divert runoff from an area that you want protected. Number 3, there are no strict berm building rules, but here are a few design guidelines that are typically followed. The slope of the berm should be gradual. You want it to have an organic look. What this means is that a berm is, on average, about 4 to 5 times as long as it is tall, and it often gradually trails out into the remaining landscape. Again, the point here is to make it look natural. Most berms are relatively short, between 18 to 24 inches, and are often curved. Now, one important thing to keep in mind when you're designing your berm is drainage. If you have a relatively flat area of land, a berm does add a slope, which means that you are altering the water flow. Changing drainage on your property could be the reason you're building a berm in the first place, but if it isn't, take a moment to think about where water will flow once the berm is in place to make sure you're not creating issues for yourself later on down the road. And finally, we'll get into this a little more later, but when you go about constructing your berm, make sure you layer it properly, since erosion can be an issue. Number 4, berms are a great do-it-yourself garden project because they are fairly easy to construct. Again, there are no strict guidelines when building berms, but here are the basic steps. Before you do anything, call 811 or your local DigSafe phone number to make sure that there are no underground utilities you may hit when excavating your berm. Then site your berm. To do this, you'll first think about its overall purpose. Are you trying to add privacy? If so, the berm is likely going to be on the edge of your lawn. Also consider the drainage patterns in your landscape and how the berm will be altering them. If there are certain areas that you know you want water to run to or away from, you'll want to consider this as you're siting your berm. After you have determined your berm's location, you can then outline your berm's perimeter using a garden hose or flower. Once you are happy with the shape of the berm, dig up the ground around the perimeter using a hoe. Start at the perimeter's edges and work your way inward. After the base is excavated, bring in fill using a wheelbarrow. And as you're building up this first layer of your berm, be very careful that you are getting the shape correct. All of your other layers are going to take the shape of this initial fill layer. So this is the stage at which you want to put some effort into shaping the berm. And keep this initial fill layer a foot or so from the outline to give yourself space for the next 2 layers. When you're happy with your fill layer, add a layer of clay on top of it and tamp the clay down. This clay layer can serve as something of a water barrier to protect your fill from erosion. Once the clay is firmly tamped down, you add your topsoil, usually about 6 to 12 inches, and you tamp that down. You then spray your berm with water and begin adding plants. Number 5, as mentioned earlier, erosion can be a concern when building a berm. This is why a layer of clay is added after the fill. But a common trick is to finish the berm with edging to help trap any soil that washes down the sides of the slope. And number 6, when it comes to planting your berm, some species will do better than others. Evergreens and drought-tolerant plants tend to do well on slopes and berms. Bigger plants should be placed at the top of the berm, while smaller plants can be added around the edges and rocks. For plant suggestions in your area, check your plant hardiness zone or go to your local nursery. But now that we've talked about garden berms, let's return to our fortified berm. In 1975, the rich phosphate deposits in Western Sahara proved to be a bit too enticing for Morocco, which moved south and occupied the territory after Spain's withdrawal. While Morocco wasn't able to completely subdue the Polisario Front, the main independence movement in Western Sahara, they were able to contain them in the eastern section of the territory, leaving Morocco with access to the rich fishing waters of the western coast, along with the region's phosphate mines. And to keep the Polisario Front from these resources, Morocco built a giant berm running the entire length of the region, north to south, splitting it in half. The berm, as it is called, is just that, a long sand berm, albeit one that is protected by the longest minefield in the world. But don't get any ideas. Just because your neighbor is noisy doesn't mean you should go and fortify that berm you're planning to build. Do you have any stories about building or designing berms? Let us know in the comments. Did you like this video? You're going to love our Gokce Land Due Diligence program. We'll make you a land due diligence expert in just 7 days. Check it out at gokcecapital.com/glad. And while you're at our website, don't forget to explore our $1 down listings at gokcecapital.com/listings. Finally, don't hesitate to reach out. You can email, call, or text, and we will respond as soon as possible. So thank you for listening, and more to come.